Thanks everyone for joining on a Friday afternoon. It's 1 o'clock, and this is also when Stanford also usually has a community of practice every other Friday called UXers. It starts at 1 o'clock every other Friday. This is an off Friday, so we have a bonus kind of UX chat. You can go to ux.stanford.edu if you want to join. It is for Stanford community members. That just makes it a little easier for us to be as transparent as possible about issues we're going through in our daily lives of UX stuffs. So today we're going to talk about the state of UX at Stanford University. This is a panel we usually do every year just for kicks and giggles. It's fun to see how things evolve over time. And our general topic is, a lot's happened over the last 2 years, but one of the things that's happening now, oh, weird, something just fell off the wall in this room I'm in. One of the things that's happening now is we're kind of going back to campus and kind of going into the office, and students are back, and we just had our first admit day since 2019 here at Stanford. I think that's a pretty big deal. So what's happening? How are people adjusting? How are UX professionals and product professionals, IT professionals, all the folks, how are they adjusting? Has it changed what people are asking for? Obviously, with the pandemic, a lot of emphasis came to the websites because it became one of the most efficient way to communicate with folks. So what's going on? How are the product strategies changing? What are the most common UX requests these days for services? What are web teams hoping to learn and achieve? And how are we adjusting how we're doing our planning to accommodate all these fun things? So our panelists today, and this is an experiment and I'm super psyched, is a panelist of project and program managers. They have a lot to do with the success of UX on campus. So the first one in alphabetical of first name is Alison Ho. She's a program manager at Stanford Web Services. Rachel Mundstock is a project manager at Stanford Web Services. And Shane Sir is a project manager in BTS, Business Technology Services.
Enterprise Technology.
Oh, thanks, Enterprise Technology. Thanks a lot. Oh yeah, it says right there, right where you wrote it down, and I ignored it. Sorry about that. So each of the panelists is going to take a few minutes to kind of just generally talk about what they're seeing in trends, 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next person, and then we'll open up to maybe some questions and things. So Alison, you get to go first. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction, David. So my name is Alison Ho, and I'm a digital program manager, and I'm mainly focused on managing a program for a large IT initiative within Stanford, which is called ADAPT. And it's essentially modernizing technologies from a super, super old database that we affectionately call Postgrads to something that's more modern and new. And Web Services has been brought in to help to modernize these really old, like blue screens of death and like arrow keyed screens into things that are more beautiful. And so Web Services is working on web applications and websites there. In terms of UX, we're seeing a lot of focus on bringing in UX earlier in the process. I think a lot of the times that I've experienced working on previous projects within Web Services and other digital projects is that UX has been brought in very late in the stage. And so it's almost like your UX team is putting out fires for projects, but not really being able to influence and strategize in the beginning of a project. And so we're seeing UX being brought in sooner. And then also part of my role is to start trying to streamline operations specifically for designers, essentially, which is something that's been kind of new and exciting to do within the past couple of years because again, as I mentioned before, design was thought as more of an afterthought versus something that was integral to the project. And then also thinking about how to best schedule time for our design and development teams while integrating agile strategies too. So I'm going to pass it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Allison. I'm Rachel Mundstock. I am a web project manager with Stanford Web Services. We have a lot of webs going on. And one of the things I've been focusing a lot on and working with specifically is we have Stanford Sites, which is our centralized platform, and it's come out with Drupal 9. And we've been working on migrating a lot of people from Drupal 7 over to Drupal 9. So doing a lot of like projects with how do we transform content? Because we're going to a new platform, we have to rewrite things. How do we approach all of these questions about, okay, I'm doing this big project for the first time and potentially like years since I've last touched my content. What are people around us doing? One of the things from working remotely, being kind of away from all things, people are coming back and they're just like, they don't really know what's going on. And they're looking to a lot of other groups across campus, to their colleagues, to kind of figure out what the new best practices are. I'm seeing a lot of questions in regards of like, hey, how are other people doing this? What have you seen other groups do that we could take some learnings from within our own group? So I think from the perspective of UX, people are asking questions, which is not always something that would come up within projects, which is always really nice, but then we have to have the answers. And then the other thing that has come up with a lot of these migration projects and incorporating UX is same thing with the transformation, an opportunity to rewrite content. How can we maybe write this so it's a little bit better? How can we use headers and kind of format our content so that it's more accessible for like screen readers and other technologies, but also like for SEO and things like that. So it's an interesting time, and I will pass it on to Shane.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm Shane Spear. I have been working on the ADAPT program, as Allison described, for a couple of years on a variety of projects. Specifically related to this topic, I also kind of ran a research program for ADAPT Digital. And I guess what I've seen changing is there was a time when a bad UX was not only forgivable, but pretty much status quo. If people wanted online things, they had to suffer online things. That has, of course, evolved a lot. And bad UX means attrition now, period. Kind of following on that, the role of research has evolved too, and especially now when things feel upside down, it's sort of there's this hidden user expectation. Users demand UX research, but not necessarily consciously. And addressing that user demand means encouraging the business in their embracing of research and dedicating support to that without reservation, while also prioritizing very carefully, tempering expectations, because it can't all happen at once. So there's this influx of interest in user research, and it's tough to actually balance that and get your projects done at the same time, because it's an unusually high demand for it.
That's in a way heartwarming, and as a UX professional, it's like, we want more research, we want more, and it's tough too, right? You can do things agile, but it also just takes time, and it has to be planned into it. Otherwise we start pushing up against project deadlines, just like adding the scope of any other project. It affects scope when you add testing, even in the most tactical type of testing. So I guess what's the, we talked a little bit about, but what's changing the most for all of you, like in your experience, and how are we addressing it? And I know that there's like smallish projects, and then there's quite large custom projects that are happening, and everywhere in between, and they have slightly different needs. So what's changing the most, and how are you addressing it? Alison, do you want to go again?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, with a greater appreciation and desire for UX, clients are actually putting funding towards UX research and design. And I think earlier we were like begging for UX to be included and funded in projects. And so it's been a really nice change to see clients ask for UX in the beginning versus us trying to suggest it and then them going like, oh, I don't know, is that going to be in my budget? Like, do I really need it? Is it something that's going to be valuable, or shouldn't we just jump into development right now, essentially? And so I think how we're addressing that is that this means that we're being able to actually resource properly for UX. So within the past couple years for ADAPT, for that larger initiative, we've been able to have more than one UX designer on projects, which has been a huge change. And it also allows for our UX designers to have friends on projects or collaborators too that they can talk to, that they can do peer review. There is a sense that there is almost maybe not quite a parallel or yet with development, but this idea of peer review is becoming more and more common. And so having our UX designers work with another person who's also a UX designer there to get feedback and things like that, work with clients, and then also have the ability to have our more senior UX designers train others on our team as well. And I'll talk more about that in the next question, but I'll pass it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Alison. One of the interesting things, and that's been changing, and I will admit, I could have a selection bias here because like I've been working with people who are already chosen to work with Stanford Sites, which is a centralized technology service. They've kind of bought into the idea that, hey, like if I can contribute to the central service, I'm going to be able to get something back as well. So I see a lot of people who just kind of, as I said before, wanting to learn what others on campus are doing. They want to hear about research that other groups are doing. For example, like we had a group that was doing some intranet service, and then we had another group that was interested in intranet. And it's like, what did you find out from that group research? What area hadn't been explored more? So there's an opportunity to kind of like dig a little deeper and take advantage of the work that had already been done. So we're kind of moving towards just like, what are the opportunities to share? And from a UX perspective, like, can I ask one of the other designers on the team, what did you find out here? What, did you wish you could have a chance to explore more deeply? That we have an opportunity for another project to kind of do that, and then hopefully serve somebody else who has a similar question. So that's been a big change, I think, just to kind of find those touch points in a way that we can explore them deeper. And then I think the other thing that's really been changing is just like some of the turnaround time that we've been seeing, in the sense of, especially when we're coming up to some of these deadlines that are happening, when people are interested in finding some UX, or funding a small bit of UX research, it's usually very quick. So there's a lot of interest into what can be done. And that's probably why in some ways we're like, oh, what can we take from our other learnings? But it's like, if I have a minimum amount of time, like what can I get back from this in a quick turnaround, or what research can I do now and maybe phase it out so that there's something more that we can learn later. But just, these are interesting times, and trying to, the big deadline that we have is, full end of life support is coming up, and getting all these sites over. So I have a feeling that post June things might change a little bit, but right now it's very quick, and learning what we can and from others as well. Pass it again to Shane.
Thanks. So what seems to be changing the most, I guess that would be that sort of like I was saying earlier, design design seems more or less understood as a fixed need, but there's new anxiety about change, specifically. Will this kind of change that we're experiencing continue? What if things don't change back? So research has really become front and center too. So I think one way that I have found myself attempting to address that is to make integration of UX into the project and the project team, make it about supporting a strategy at the program level. Like there's desire to adjust priorities to accommodate new behaviors or anticipated new behaviors. There are tons of questions about that and little time to answer them all. So securing early involvement from UX is critical to that, to determine which questions can have meaningful answers, which ones are most important, and get that early and ongoing input from UX, both for the project's efficiency and the health of the resource pool. You're going to want to use them again, so get UX support early in keeping it tight.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'll represent a little bit different part of the business as well from the Stanford Web Services and UIT perspective. One of the things that we're seeing more requests as well is UX only projects for things like Stanford Mobile or an application here and there, a student support kind of thing. And also, and another example would be is right now we're doing some preliminary research and a conceptual design around a future SGG budget request ask that's centered around student support. So there's lots of interesting stuff happening as far as not just websites, but folks on the other side of the UIT house kind of realizing the need for some UX sophistication on some of the things that they're working on. Additionally, Stanford UIT is instituting a service release practice and process. And along that, in addition to things like accessibility and monitoring and security, there's also UX minimum requirements along with that. So more and more projects and services are being delivered and are going through, depending on their size, like either very lightweight UX research and validation. Validation, maybe that's the wrong word, but at least evaluation and paying attention to it, to much more robust if it's a larger property with lots of users and things like that. So that's happening too. So let's see, there's lots of change happening. We're all talking about that. And I think we're all learning. So how are you adjusting? How are you refining your approaches to the changes? Alison, you want to lead us off again? Thank you very much.
Sure, definitely happy to do that. So in terms of refining your approach, I think a lot about operations. And so you're going to sort of see this like theme of resourcing and allocations. And so one of the things that I've been doing is advocating for resourcing at least 2 or multiple UX designers on a project, generally with someone who's focusing on leading and attending all of the meetings now that UX is more integrated into project work, and then someone who's focused on production work, so that it allows that time for our designers to actually get work done versus be in meetings. We're also hiring with different disciplines of UX specialization in mind. So I would say when I first started at Web Services about 4 years ago, all of our UX designers were what I would say are unicorns. They were expected to do both of the double diamonds of UX, both research and design. But within this past year, we hired our first UX researcher. And so we're seeing a shift in our UX team being able to specialize or continue to do both diamonds if that is what they wish to do. We're also beginning to hire content strategists too, which has been really helpful for our UX team, and it helps them scale in their work. So for example, we just launched the new travel study site for the Stanford Alumni Association, in which Bhavika was our lead visual designer for that website, but she also had help from a content strategist too. Her name is Jeannie Goshi, and she was able to do content audits, write copy within wireframes and mockups, and work in collaboration with Bhavika, which also I think was able to help Bhavika focus more on the visual part versus writing in content for our clients so that they could sort of imagine what the website might look like. We're also looking and trying out new tools that will help to scale our UX designers' work too. So we've experimented with things like DScout, which is a user research tool that actually can get you a panel together pretty easily. And then Optimal Workshop, which also allows for testing and card sorting and tree jack testing and things like that that can be done remotely. So I'll pass it over to Rachel.
Wait.
And
Oh,
just really quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bhavika.
I just wanted to address a couple of the questions that came up in the chat. First one was from Cynthia, which is, if the client does their own research, how much do you take at face value? How much validation do you need to take on the next phase of your project?
I can answer that one. So we just like any other research report, we'll take a look at it and hopefully, if it's done in a way that we agree with and we can trust it more. If it's done with methodologies that might make it seem more market research or sometimes more focus groupy, we just have to take it for what it is and then pull the things that we can learn from it, and then decide, is this enough, data for us to move forward with the goals of the project? Does this fulfill the learning needs, the research goals for the project, or are there still gaps in knowledge for us to move forward? So that's how we look at it. It's okay, it doesn't matter really who has done it, as long as it provides the data that we need to have there. And I think Alison might be able to answer the content strategist question from Barbara a little better than me.
Yeah, sure. So I'll read the question out too. The question is, can you define the role of your content strategist? Do they do information architecture as well as write content? And then Anne is also curious to know more about content strategists and other role responsibilities. And so so content strategists are a pretty wide range of responsibilities, and it's dependent on also that person's background too. But in my experience, our content strategists do everything. They're the keepers of content, essentially. So they will do content audits, so go through like an old site, page by page, say like what the URL is, what's on that page, and then do analysis on the content, whether or not you want to keep it updated or it's just not needed anymore there. So there's that content audit part. And then there's also our content strategists also can write page level copy too. So some of them are able to do this and some of them are not. It really depends what their background is, if they have that copywriting skill too. It's something that we've looked for because we're still growing, so we do need to have more content strategists really be able to run the gamut of like things they're able to do. But I would expect content strategists to do like things like voice and tone, look at style guides, look at current copy to like figure out like if the grammar and punctuation is correct based on the style guides and things like that. I do expect our content strategists to work directly with our design and developers to write content for the page. And I think a specialization that at least our content strategist that we're working with, Jeannie, right now is she's doing UX copy, essentially. And so what that means is that instead of doing just page level marketing based copy, she's also doing things like writing error messages, writing what fields should be called, or like how to communicate to user, like what to do in a specific web application context too. And so that's been really nice actually for our development team, because as you might imagine in a web application, you could have a lot of different error messages, and instead of our dev team writing those error messages, we have a content slash copywriter who's actually writing in those error messages there too. In terms of information architecture, Jeannie does do like information architecture, and content strategists can, but I think what's really awesome is when you can have a content strategist work with a UX designer to do the information architecture together. But I think what was helpful in our travel study project was that since Jeannie had done a content audit, Bhavika was able to come in and be like, oh yeah, like this is how I would view it from a UX standpoint. And Jeannie was supposed to, this is how I view it from a content strategist standpoint. So does that answer the questions there?
I think so. That's great.
Okay.
So let's go to Rachel on back to like refining your approach. How's that going? It was a little, that was a jaunt, but it was all helpful. So thank you.
I
very
was
much,
like, where
everybody,
are we?
for
What's going on?
Yeah.
Well, I was actually just going to say, kind of like piggybacking on what Alison was saying as well about content strategists, is I think, you know, especially working with some of these smaller groups that are undergoing a transformational change on their website where we're like replatforming it. We also find we kind of have a variation of a content strategist who we'll sometimes refer to as a content mapper, where they're able to take items, for example, like in Drupal, we're transforming into having paragraphs that weren't necessarily available in the Drupal 7 version. So how we need help with like, okay, this is what we want, an element that could be in a card. This is an element that we could have in a text paragraph. That have been helpful in some of these like smaller projects where they might not go in as depth as like Jeannie's able to do in the other projects, but like sometimes you just need someone who can help step in and just have another eyeball of how you can format things to be better. And that also helps because when we're trying to like copy paste content over, just someone saying, okay, this specific area should be called out a little bit more, just helps the general structure of the page as well. But the original one was, how are we refining our approach? So I work on a lot of smaller projects in the sense of like there's multiple clients, a lot of different things happening all at once. And also the UX team that I work with, there's people jumping in and out of these projects as well. So I think there's trying to emphasize like documentation and collection of some of these best practices to help future us, so that we're able to access research that we've done and remember it. I was actually, Carrie and Bhavika on the call, I was looking at some of their files from 2018 because I was trying to access something, and it was very helpful because they had it all laid out. It was easy to find what I wanted, so that we don't lose the information that we've gathered previously as we're trying to like jump between all these different priorities, making sure you just take the time to have it collected. Another client that we work with is the School of Engineering, and their team has actually taken it a step further, and they've created a communications toolkit. It's like an entirely separate website that their communications team manages that has some of the best practices and findings that they've learned from research, so that people who like are just interested in it can come and see things, and it's all there and accessible for everybody. So that's a model that we're trying to encourage others to do, just so that we're not expected to remember everything at every point in time. It's just the ability to like, okay, this is the important part. I'm going to be able to reference it later, so that you can move on to do other things. Yeah. And I guess on to Shane.
Shane, thank you.
So refining my approach, I guess one thing I'm trying to do is to make the UX engagement as long as possible. Ideally, UX has representation from day one to help refine objectives and figure out how to measure success, help avoid reinventing any wheels through secondary research, discovery of best practices, and help maintain focus on what viability means to users and how to set ourselves up for learning from future usage. And kind of tied in with that, I also am trying to think of UX as a stakeholder of sorts, with the goal of accounting and planning for their infrastructure, their process development, and supporting a rigor that ensures their efforts will be contextualized, they'll be reliable, and they'll become part of the larger body of knowledge in the org. We all benefit from the UX team getting stronger, so we have to support that in project context.
Thank you, Shane. I'll also mention that on my team in Stanford Web Services, the design team, Alison mentioned that we're hiring more vertical roles. So we have David Salazar just joined us. He's our senior UX researcher, but we're also hiring more junior level roles too. And one of the things that we do once a year is we take a look at our structure and our operations, and we poke at ourselves a little bit and say, hey, is this working? Are all the assumptions that we have around how we are allocating work, how we share work on projects, how are we making sure that the right people are being put on projects, or the right types of people as far as roles go, and making sure that we do have time for our peer review on all of our projects, besides more than just me, because it's not good just to have peer review from one person all the time. And everyone can provide different types of peer review. We all look at different things. So that's some of the things we're doing on the operations side, on our design team, is that kind of fun stuff. Okay, so how do you feel these trends are putting y'all in a better position to do great UX work? It sounds like a lot of exciting stuff and planning is happening, and I can already, it's great to hear all this, because I know we have good partners when we're working with you three and other project managers that we have around campus. So thank you for that. But how do you feel that these trends are putting Stanford in a better position from a UX perspective, being able to do better work all the time and in the future? Do we want to go backwards this time? Do you want to go Shane first? Let's go Shane first.
I can handle that. So awareness definitely helps. Again, that part is easy. Like, we're a research institution, and I see quality information is playing a huge role in our projects. One thing I would identify as a growing pain is from the business perspective. It's like, okay, we did what we needed to do. We prioritized our questions. We got the most important answers. Now, what about the other ones? Or what about new important questions? What is our usage data telling us, and how are we going to react to that? We don't have the luxury of constantly working to make one app better. We have a lot to do. Resources move on. So it's important to kind of collectively acknowledge that there needs to be a support plan and make establishing that part of the project. It's just, like I say, we don't have just one mission and one thing that we're trying to support. So it's not obvious how you're going to be able to do research and react to research unless you really lay it out, what happens after launch.
Yeah, long-term operations, and not along all the lines, I'm sure, but also making sure that UX is a part of that, which usually ends up being, in some projects, UX has been gone for a while because they haven't been too involved towards the end. Maybe some QA and things like that if things have been rolling well.
Yeah.
Rachel, let's go to you.
I think this is a great question, like how their individuals are getting in a position to do some better UX work. The importance of central services, and Bhavika linked the UX, the website in chat, but I think there's been so much opportunity to just continue to be like, okay, these are some of like the central core, and how can we like push on that and explore things from different opportunities, so we're not reinventing the wheel with every different project, has really put us in a position that each time we're presented with a new opportunity, we can go a little bit further because of all the time and effort that people have done before to kind of give us a head start. So that's been really exciting, and just to see like what groups have been able to do with like limited funds to kind of explore in other areas that they, we're building on stuff that we've done before, which is really nice. And I think it's also interesting from perspective of our UX designers are able to kind of like, Kat might be able to be like, oh, Bhavika did this really cool thing, I'm going to push it a little bit further. So everyone kind of gets an opportunity to explore via interest or just a little bit different methodology. So just learning from each other has been hugely helpful.
That's fun. And I also just wanted to say there seems to be another question in the chat. So this one comes from Christina. What question is in your top 3 wish lists that non-UXers could answer at the beginning of a project? It's a great question.
I can take a shot at one of the ones I would love is if mentioned before, lots of little projects and little websites. I would love if everybody had the opportunity to really answer what their goal was for whatever the project was. So just sit and say, this is what I would like to accomplish and what I want this to do. Especially when, we're working with so many different items, we can consider a group like UX experts, but we are not an expert in your content or what other specific item that you're working on. So it really is a partnership. And, if we can get the support of this is what I would like to accomplish, it only enhances the work that we can do.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. That like the first thing that happens in any project when you bring a new type of expert of any kind, like they'll say, okay, what are we doing? And you say, we're building a website. And they go, whoa, hold on. Who said that? So it's, I think, a good idea to, before you kick off, like, think about the question why, and just like a little kid, ask it again and again and again until you feel like you can't ask it anymore. And then you're at a place where you can, like, a roadmap for communicating what you're trying to do to the project team.
I definitely agree with both Shane and Rachel. Plus one to what are the goals or what are the business objectives for the project. It's definitely nice to have clients come in with their goals and business objectives versus the how of like, well, I think we should make it like this. And I think that gives our UX team the opportunity to delve in to the issue or the problem that's being trying to be solved versus a technical solution first. So.
I'll add in there too. Oh wait, I think Alison still has a thing, but let me answer this one part. Yes to everyone else, what everyone else has said. User tasks, I would love to know that ahead of time. How those user tasks and operational goals fit in with the business goals of the whatever is being created or trying to be recreated or whatever. One of the things that I think is really important about the UX process is even when that's all supplied, you'll notice that a lot of times you'll get a brief back where the UX designers and the researchers and the project managers have restated exactly what the goals were, because part of our job is to ensure that not only we're all aligned on the goals, but we also are aligned on the same meaning of that goal. And I think that's one of the things that we're able to do in the design process really well, is to express those maybe visually, where it's a lot harder to or to interpret those things differently. Text is very easy to interpret multiple ways, which is why literature is so awesome, right? But it's not so good for making sure we're all thinking the same thing, that we're, that we're building all the same thing. Alison, you want to go into that last question?
Sure.
You feel how are we putting our teams in better position? Is all these trends making, I'll remind everyone, how are the trends doing for getting us better work, doing better work?
I think especially when like funding shows up for UX, it definitely allows our team to have greater opportunities to grow. And I think that's sort of been the theme about our UX team growing and growing professionally, the reputation of our team growing too. So more work comes our way after work has been launched and delivered successfully. It's been nice to be able to be in a position to ask our UX team what kind of work or what kind of problems do they want to solve within projects, and where do they want to develop. And I think that's something that I've seen really in the past year and a half. They've been able to ask that question and have options versus like, this is the only project that we have right now that needs or has UX resources available. And so that's been something that's been really like awesome to see. And I think it's only going to put our team in a better position to perform great UX at Stanford.
So I'll just add a couple things there. I think as more and more projects, so as we've hired more people, and as have we, since I've started at SWS, we would only have maybe 1 or 2 designers, and we'd have 5 or 6 projects going on, and only 1 or 2 of those projects would actually even have any UX budget or intent, right? Even though obviously you're always doing UX if you're doing websites, right? There's always some UX. So now we're getting to the place where almost every single one of our project teams has a designer to work with. And that we're integrating that time into our projects. And that also allows us then to improve the integration of the services with our project managers, with our developers, with our accessibility people, with our QA people, with our business strategists. So UX is becoming more and more ingrained all the way through all of Stanford Web Services, whereas before maybe it was a couple of the teams within Stanford Web Services were project teams, were really mature. The maturity is growing across all that. It also means that maturity, as our clients and partners that we work with, as they get more and more exposure to working with teams with UX research, they're maturing as well, because we're all learning how to get better at it all the time together. So that's been a really wonderful outcome of all the other fun stuff that's happening with funding and interest and need. So let's open up to more questions. Any other thoughts? Anyone have any thoughts or questions or things to add? There's lots of completely capable people here. We got Barbara from Duke. She's amazing. She's got a great Zoom picture of herself there. It's awesome. It's got colors. Any questions from anybody? Any thoughts? Any yes ands? Christina, go.
So I'm curious, you were talking like in answer to my question, so thank you for that, about like alignment, about even the meaning of goals. You restate the goals back to your client, and hopefully that they agree with that. How does that look? Is that like how do you have a document that you can keep coming back to as a North Star over the life cycle of a website or a project that's transparent with your client, within your team? How does that kind of look in your team's process?
It's interesting that you say that we, of course, we end up with like a project specs kind of thing and with goals and stuff like that. And usually our clients come with goals, right? In a document that they have. We find that we use a little user experience design here, is we put the goals and the objectives on the top of almost all the documents that we have, just to make sure that we don't have to go back looking for them. They're right there. so that we get reminded when we're looking at the research plan, we get reminded of what the goals of the project are and the goals of the research, right? So we try and make sure that we just bring those back into other artifacts that we have. And I think also our designers, Carrie's really good at this, is just saying, oh yeah, let's just take a quick look at the goals before we look at these designs. And, you know, just to remind ourselves. And I think Rachel, on a project that she's working on with a couple of the designers that we work with, one is Ishi on our team and one is Nika Lorber, who's a contractor. They did a really great job of framing the documentation for feedback on our design work around the goals. Let's remind ourselves of the goals. It's, of course, there's aesthetics and we have preferences around what something, you know, visually pleasing is, but let's just keep on reminding ourselves, what are the goals? The goals was for this, to this, this. Please evaluate what you're seeing in these mocks against the goals. Does it meet your business goals, the user goals that we've identified further along? So that was very, very effective. And that was with a large group of stakeholders, and it was super effective on getting their content or their feedback more aligned along something that we could actually, you know, enact and improve the design on. And, you know, we took preference feedback as well, of course, too, because that's important. Aesthetics are important, but it helped us and them kind of prioritize the feedback they were giving us.
Jumping in to say full credit though to Bhavika and Carrie, who spearheaded that kind of framework, and we were able to kind of take that to the next level because of the learnings they had on another project. So goes back to we learn from each other.
I think
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alison.
one thing that also has been helpful is getting the whole team to repeat goals at the beginning of like presentations and meetings and things like that, to the point where our clients might be bored of us telling us what the goals are. But I've seen that work really well, so that it grounds a presentation or a meeting or a design presentation or something like that, so that our clients know their goals, our team knows their goals, because our team may be working on multiple projects, our stakeholders may be on multiple projects as well. So having that grounding moment in like every single design meeting or just general meetings too, help there.
Like also having I think that process sort of forces the team to have a bullet point version of everything. The most plainly stated version of each goal is something that you can just really reiterate on and bounce back to.
Hey, people, Anne has a question also in the chat, and if I would love it if she could restate it, because I'm a little confused by it, but even worse, I have to leave because I need to go moderate a session. But some other folks can stay on and answer the question. Thanks everyone so much. The state of UX at Stanford is strong. Haha. Keep on, stay along for that last question about best techniques.
So Anne, let's see, I'm trying to find your rectangle. Oh, there you are. Yeah, would you mind restating that question if you are still around?
Yeah, hello.
Hi there.
Hey, thanks for putting on these great sessions. They were so informative and supportive. It's really great. I had a question. Let's see, Tom did mention about a feedback form during the development of new content. And I'm wondering if once things have been published and running along for a while, what are some of the techniques or approaches to kind of circle back and make sure that what we have done has been successful? I know when I build a report, I will, for example, I'll make a suggestion, we should do X, Y, Z, but I also note on that saying we could possibly measure the success of this by looking at analytics for this and that? I mean, do you have any kind of systems for those approaches? Or best techniques?
I think one might be, and this is from my last year of experience working with UX research, that if you can build that into your generating questions, that's a useful thing. Like if we're talking about what do we want our research questions to be, each of them should be tied to something measurable. And at the earliest possible point would probably be a good time to look at that. It can help you prioritize your questions too. I'm not sure if I'm stating that very well, but every question needs to set you up for understanding whether you answered it right.
I'm not sure if this is going to answer your question, but one of the things that we tend to think about with our clients is our projects are, or at least our websites and web applications are all living and breathing. And so they're always constantly evolving. So there isn't necessarily really an end to that specific website or web application. And so we're revisiting it even as a team if our client is still engaging with us with that website or web application there. And so they may engage with our UX researcher to formulate a plan on how things are going with the goals in mind, or how the business has changed and the goals have changed now, and what sort of updates need to be made to that website or web application. And then there are tools and things we can use, things like Hotjar or Google Analytics, to look at where people are going and what user paths are being used within that website or web application. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question either, but I'm gonna take a stab at it.
Yeah, that does lend toward it. It's kind of circling back into the research part of things, sort of in the cycle of the whole development of the project. You just kind of go back to the beginning and research on things.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think it's really just one of the basic things would be to make sure that you're planning for those resources, like Shane was alluding to earlier. Because I think oftentimes what happens is we're just going to deploy this and hope that we're going to get these numbers, but these numbers are not going to have any meaning unless you have somebody develop that meaning out of that data. So.
Thank you, David. David is our senior user experience researcher, and just for some additional context there. Are there any other questions? I just want to open up the floor really quick before we close out the panel for today. And if not, then I guess we can give you 3 minutes back in the day. Thank you so much, Shane, Allison, and Rachel. This was so wonderful. And thanks to David Tom too, who had to leave. But yeah, this was wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thanks for moderating,
Thank you.
Bhavika.
Yay.
Thanks all.
Have a good one.